Hello everybody, here I am back at you again with another video. Now this one was long in the making, and I knew if I didn't get it done now, it was another one I had to bite the bullet on or it would never get done. And that is my personal top 5 favorite albums from 2024. Now, 2024, look, I don't get to listen to everything like I do with watching all the movies, but I definitely wanted to give you my thoughts on some of my favorite records, as I always do every year. And yeah, so this is definitely, I think, a great year for music overall. I think the selection of albums I have on this list is definitely a little bit stronger than last year's slate, and I think a lot more diverse in many different ways. And so let's not waste any more time, and let's just get right into it. But before we get started, let me just throw up on the screen some of my honorable mentions for the best albums of 2024. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's crack into the list. And coming in at number 5, let me just say before I get into this, I'm very happy that this year I didn't necessarily have 3 soundtrack albums from movies, but if there was one I had to include on this list, it has to be the Brutalist original motion picture soundtrack from Daniel Blumberg, the Oscar-winning score, which I will consider an all-time great film score already when it came out. I mean, as soon as I saw it in theaters, I was like, oh yeah, like this has to win the Oscar for Best Original Score. I wasn't certain at the time if I liked it more than something like the soundtrack to Dune Part 2, which obviously was only an honorable mention, I know, for being my favorite movie of the year. But this one, after watching again, I just think these motifs are so strong. And even if a lot of the album is a single motif kind of done over and over again in different arrangements of that, that's absolutely fine by me if the motif is this strong, especially the overture and Laszlo's theme for the movie, that bum 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 bum. I mean, it's almost iconic at this point, I think, already. You know, just seeing him walk off the ship at the beginning of the film and seeing the Statue of Liberty for the very first time, I mean, it really is something you never forget, and I think it's one of those moments that's so tied to the music that is being presented in that scene. And then, of course, like, the overture with him on the bus going down the road is so epic. And I mean, just the way they twist and weave this theme throughout this entire film is just absolutely spectacular. And the score itself is about as grand and archaic as something like Lawrence of Arabia, and I don't throw that compliment out there lightly, but it's also mixed with a lot more dissonant instrumentation and electronic textures, which I think it still feels timeless in a lot of ways, but you can tell that there's a bit of a modernity to it. But in a way that still, like I said, feels timeless. And I just love how a lot of these tracks are very jazz-infused as well. Especially Jazz Club, which is just basically a straight-up bebop number which starts tripping on heroin in the second half of it. And there's so many tracks that follow in the same vein, like Building Site. But I also love tracks like Steel, which build off of the main theme, but also, like, it feels like with the instrumentation, it feels like you're actually working on a construction site with the percussion that they use. It is absolutely phenomenal, and I absolutely love how there's different influences mixed in there as well. At the end, you got a little bit of like 80s electronic kind of thrown into the mix. And I love how on tracks like Heroin, the overture motif and Jazz Club kind of seamlessly come together in this perfect unison. But man, there's so many iconic tracks on this, especially the other main motif in the film, the Erzsébet theme for Felicity Jones's character, is just so ethereal and so beautiful and so calming and so memorable. And it just brings this piece to such a dark and daunting film, I think, overall. And I just absolutely love just how diverse this one soundtrack is. Even if, as I said, a lot of it is based around one motif, I just think it's so strong throughout. And that's the thing, it's not just that one motif. And I think easily the strongest score of the year, and definitely the strongest soundtrack album to any movie from all of last year. And then at number 4, of course, I have Chromacopia by Tyler, the Creator, the 8th studio album from the rapper, songwriter, which obviously I did a review on in the On Wax review series. This is definitely one of Tyler's best albums. I think just the whole concept alone as well, him kind of like tackling this persona head on, and also kind of taking a look at, the effects fame has had on his life, his sort of commitment to non-monogamy in a lot of ways, and so many amazing tracks on this album, especially Noid, which I think is just such an explosive single, and one of the first songs to really kick off this album. But I think songs like Hey Jane and Judge Judy are not only some of his most sublime compositions, but some of his most daring from a storytelling standpoint, and some of his most brilliant lyrics that I think he's ever put to record. Is very much in the vein of something like Igor, but I think the way he tackles the ideas and themes are very, very different in a lot of ways, and just kind of like trying to find out who you really are. Don't allow yourself to put up a front and not be open and vulnerable with people in the way that you should be, which is so interesting in the way it contrasts with Tyler's public persona and the way he presents himself in public, even though he seems like a very genuine guy in that regard. I just think the emotional honesty of this record is something that I really haven't seen from a lot of albums from this past year. There might be another one, which I will get into, that kind of might give it a run for its money, but I really do think that this is definitely a triumph in Tyler, the Creator's career, and I think it really has established him even further as maybe the finest talent in hip-hop working today. I don't think that there are many artists that have this level of consistency and craft and just sonic, lushness to the albums. I mean, the chord progressions throughout this entire album are just so R&B laden in ways that are so surprising and soothing, and yeah, I love this album, and I definitely am very much looking forward to see whatever Tyler does next, and I really do hope to get to see him this summer. That's definitely someone I've been wanting to see for some time, and I really am going to try to take that opportunity and make it happen. And coming in at number 3 on the list, I have Masha Shana by Father John Misty. Now, this is an artist that I have only gotten into recently, and probably the reason that this video is so far behind, because I wanted to give this album a fair couple of shakes before I got on here and talked about it. But I really have liked a lot of his other albums. I'm not completely in love with everything that he's done, but this album to me really solidified my love for Father John Misty as an artist. Of course, Mr. Josh Tillman tackling so many ideas on here through his persona of Father John Misty, but so musically broad in a way I don't think he's ever quite had. Like, the musical palette on this album is absolutely phenomenal, spectacular. There's so many elements of jazz and symphonic music in a way that feels so big and so large. And it's like a cross between like the abstract lyricism of Dylan, but also mixed with Neil Young, Radiohead, Lou Reed, and I would even say the Beatles. I mean, some of the arrangements on here are very Sgt. Pepper-esque, and I really, really loved the string arrangements throughout this entire record. They were always fresh, they were always surprising, and just the themes that he tackles on this album too, whether it be, the pitfalls of fame, religion, sex, the commodification of mental health, which is tackled so magnificently on the track of the same name. And I just think one of the most powerful moments on the album, to be sure. But of course, I mean, I have to talk about that amazing, amazing song, I Guess Time Just Makes Fools of Us All, which is as dryly cynical as like any Dylan song, but a real like funky blues number that absolutely rips the entire time. I think there are a couple moments where the album gets a little overblown, but I think the songwriting here is, even though you could argue some of it is a little pretentious, it is just so spectacular from top to bottom, and I don't think that there are many songwriters working on this level today. I absolutely think that this is a top 250 album for me. Like, it really is that good. And it could have been even higher if there weren't a couple spots in the middle that kind of slowed it down for me. But I really, really love so many songs off this record, and I just think it's such a diverse piece of musical cohesion from top to bottom, and undeniably Father John Misty's best record to date. Yet again, another artist where he comes out with something, I'm always going to listen from this point forward. And you got to give it up for Mr. Josh Tillman for creating such a phenomenal and fantastic record. And coming in at the number 2 slot, I have Hit Me Hard and Soft by Miss Billie Eilish, the third studio album from the pop sensation, and I think easily the best mainstream pop record for the entirety of 2024 that I've heard. And I think that this continues the streak that Billie Eilish has had as the most consistent artist in, the pop realm. And I think that not only is the production from Finneas just as stellar this time around, but the songwriting is arguably the most mature to date from the songwriting duo, especially tackling everything that Billie has gone through in the whirlwind that has been, most of her adolescent years in the industry and dealing with the rise of fame, but also a lot of toxicity, not just in regards to that side of the whole equation, but also a lot of, toxic relationships that she's been through, and this one kind of channeling a breakup and how she kind of got over it and realized her own self-worth. It really is so beautiful, just from the opening track, Skinny, which lyrically I think describes a lot of what I was saying earlier, but also, just so beautiful from a compositional standpoint, so surprising, so fresh. And of course, you have to mention Birds of a Feather, which I knew as soon as I heard this album, I really didn't know why that wasn't the lead-off single, because when you hear this record, that is immediately the catchiest and poppiest tune on this entire thing, and it took off immediately afterwards, to nobody's surprise. I just think one of her most finely tuned pop songs to date, and I just absolutely love, like I said, the production on this record. Sure, there's a couple moments that lyrically I don't think that are that great, like Lunch or whatever, and I'm not going to dive too much more into this album because I've already reviewed it and you can check that out if you'd like. But I really do think that this is up there with some of her best work, and if someone said that this was her best album, I wouldn't really argue them whatsoever, because I really do think that this is such a fantastic effort from Billie and Finneas, and I really hope that they can go 4 for 4 on the next one, because there aren't many groups that I can think of that have 3 great albums right out of the gate. I can think of like Jimi Hendrix Experience, I can think of the Velvet Underground, I can think of Arctic Monkeys, but there aren't really that many groups. I'm sure there's a couple more, Bill Withers as well, but yeah, I just think that this has just been such a hot streak that I have been completely invested in as soon as I heard When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go? And I'm glad to see that they continue to evolve as artists and keep developing and delivering on that level of consistency. And for my favorite album of 2024, I have The New Sound by Jordy Griep, the previous frontman of the electronic rock band Black Midi. I mean, maybe electronic rock is kind of limiting them a little bit, but I think one of the most diverse and interesting bands to emerge in the past 5 years. Cavalcade made my top 5 of 2021 based on what I heard, and I also think Hellfire was one of the absolute best albums from 2022. And so, naturally, it was a bummer to hear that the group had split off, but one thing that brought a lot of promise is they were working on their own material, and Jordy Griep, obviously, I think is the mastermind behind that group. And look, this guy is a couple months younger than me, and I'm almost convinced that this guy's an absolute musical genius, because he is doing some of the most innovative stuff I have heard in such a long time. And just the way he combines elements of salsa music with rock and electronica is unlike anything I've ever heard. I mean, this is like really straight up Latin influenced, and you feel it on every single track. Even from the opening number, Blues, which features those thrashing arpeggios that I think really permeated a lot of Black Midi's work, it is just, it really kicks this whole album into high gear almost immediately. And then leading right into Terra, which has more of a salsa feel than anything that Black Midi had ever done. It almost feels like a Steely Dan song in a lot of ways, which I mean is the highest of compliments, of course, because I just absolutely love the diversity on this record. Like I said with Black Midi, but I think even more so with this album. I would even argue that this is better than anything Black Midi had ever done, and maybe it's a good thing that Jordy Griep is out there doing his own thing by himself, because I just think that this is some of the most original material I've heard in a very long time from any artist. But there's so many great and vast ideas on here, like on Through a War, where he's basically talking about the authoritarian lengths this man will go to win this woman's love, or on As If Waltz, where he's talking about a temporary love that he really wants to make feel like it lasts forever, and also maybe being cuckolded. I don't know, man. It's such a sexually transgressive record as well, in all the best ways imaginable. Especially on songs like Holy Holy, which is very tasteful string and brass arrangements are mixed with so many mystifying elements of electronica and guitars swirling all around, which leads to such a sexually transgressive climax that just absolutely explode, no pun intended. It is just absolutely amazing what he's able to do from top to bottom on this record. I could get into so many different musical elements on here, whether it be harmonicas thrown throughout the mix, organs, what have you. I mean, everything in the kitchen sink is on this album, and I think that this is by far the most spectacular achievement that I heard in music from all of last year, and I really can't wait to see what Griep does next, because I think any album he's going to come out with is going to be absolute fire, to be quite honest. And I think for that matter, I want to see what the other members of Black Midi do as well, because I just think this collective has given us some of the most interesting music from the past few years, and if this is any proof of what these guys are up to next, then I am all in for it. So yeah, guys, that is my favorite album from 2024, and those are my top 5 albums of that year. So let me know what you think about my picks. If you agree with a lot of what I said, is there anything I'm missing? I know I didn't listen to Brat by Charlie XCX, but to be honest, I was kind of struggling getting through her stuff to begin with, so I completely understand there's some things that I have not gone to, but I'd still love to hear what your favorite albums are nonetheless down in the comments below. And please smash the like button and subscribe to the channel if you like what I'm doing here. I don't get to do music stuff all the time, but rest assured there will be a lot of content regardless down the line at some point throughout this year and onwards, so please stay on the lookout for that and all the movie reviews, so much more on this channel, and I will talk to you guys in the next one.